plastic welding your 3D printed parts. Today we'll cover proper procedure, effective seam removal, and leaving you with flawless results. It's all in today's video. Join me, won't you? Alright, what's up everyone? Back at it again. It is DW Darkwing Dad, and yes, today we are talking about plastic welding your 3D print. So this is a revised video from some of my other PLA welding videos. Of course, it's plastic welding because we're using a lot more than PLA. This video is just an updated version. It's condensed down a little bit more. I do use some new tools, a little bit of a newer process that I have adapted to really give you the strongest and best bond, the best merge possible. That way you don't have to worry about cracking and things like that. Also cover some tips and tricks on how to properly eliminate that seam where the weld occurs. There's also a couple additional tips and tricks for things that might just happen in the printing and merging process. Make sure to watch to the end of the video because I've got some comments, recap, and additional info for you. Without any further ado, let's jump right into the video and show you how it's done. Let's go. All right, so here we are. We have printed our helmet. This is a Iron War Machine or Iron Punisher file via Mystery Makers 3D. Big shout out to Marco. The way this file comes is it's actually in two pieces. The first thing we want to do is we want to have some sort of adhesive. You can use super glue, you can use JB Weld, things like that. They don't all work the same, and we don't want to just rely on just that adhesive compound to hold it together. You can go ahead and tape this when you weld it. However, it can shift, it can move. We don't want that. We kind of want it anchored in place, and really the best thing that is going to create our anchor is going to be PLA glue. If you are using PETG, ABS, 3D gloop does make this for those specific thermoplastics. This is going to be a lot different than something like super glue or JB Welds. There's a chemical reactant that is going to melt this together, so that's why this is really great. Now this does have a very quick set time, so we're not going to be able to do the entire helmet, but we want to do it where it's going to hold it the best, essentially is what we're going to have to do. So what we want to do is go ahead and take our tape off. I'm going to kind of do two lines just right here and maybe try to get a little bit on the top of the widow's peak. And just take this and try to line it up best as we can. I like to let gravity kind of hold it in place. We want to make sure any major lines, that's what we want to use as a guide. We got it pretty good like that. We want to just let that sit for about 5 to 10 minutes, come back and take a look at it. Show you a couple tools here that we're going to be using to melt and merge our plastic pieces back together. A plastic stapler. I like using this little zigzag pattern here. It really works the best. Just hold this button down for a couple seconds. It heats right up. It's got tons of staples here, so if you break them or lose them. Of course, we are going to be using our soldering iron. Typically, when using the soldering iron, I like to use it about 60 to 70 degrees warmer than what you print at. If you go higher, you may get into a situation where it heats up the plastic too much, it starts sagging, and then it just creates more work for yourself. Tip I like to start off with is this guy right here, because it just kind of creates a nice little bridge. To start off with the gun. And the gun I like to use specifically on the inside. It's going to push this button down and let this heat up. And you can see what it does is it creates this really nice weld. Okay, so that's just going to kind of temporarily hold it together. We're going to do this just in a few parts for now. Eventually, we're going to do the whole inside of the helmet. We do have some pretty noxious chemicals in this PLA glue. It's never a bad idea to have your PPE and just do a couple weld points just so this is a little bit more structurally sound, and then we're going to work on welding the outside. So important when you do that first piece of merging here to make sure that everything is lined up. You can see here that that is very good, and we're going to have to do a little bit of reshaping with things like fillers and putties. For some reason, when it printed, you can see that there's a gap. I guess it wasn't completely flat on the build plate, and that's okay because I'm going to show you how to fix that. You know, it does leave us with this little gap here, and what we don't want to do is just start throwing putties and fillers on there. That's not the proper way to do it. What we're going to do is both on the inside and the outside is we are going to take our soldering iron here. When you have your two pieces of PLA like this, and you run that soldering iron tip, it kind of creates like a canal. So it not only merges it on the very top, but it's also creating a little channel, so it's going deeper than just the top, because we're going to sand this. So we don't want to just like kind of take this and scrape this over the top, and then when we sand that down, we've just sanded away most of the material that is merging this together. Very gently just go over that seam. I'm not really applying any pressure, it's just the weight of the soldering iron. But what it's doing is pushing that down as we're sealing this seam off. We're taking that plastic and we're closing that gap. And then as you're doing this, what I like to do is go back to my gun. You don't want to push too hard when you're doing this. You want it just to kind of melt in. Again, I'm going to go along and seal all of this up with my soldering iron. I'm going to staple on the inside. Then I'm going to take this and go over this seam on the inside. That way we have it essentially stapled, we have the seam sealed on the outside, and we have the seam sealed on the inside, which is going to give us the best merging ability inside and out. Now, one thing that you can do, you can actually take the PLA gloop, and if you have gaps you feel maybe won't get sealed off, you can always take your PLA gloop and put a little bit of force on it, because what that will do, push through that crack. So if we have a little bit of a gap there, we're pushing the gloop through, so it's also going to chemically merge that on the inside. We can see here on this, we have like a little bit of a gap that we may not be able to fully get from the top and the bottom. So for peace of mind, if you're trying to get the strongest possible merge together, never a bad thing to kind of work some PLA gloop in between that seam before you go ahead and plastic weld it. So I'm going to go ahead though and merge the rest of this together, both by doing the staples where I can and closing off the seam. So disclaimer, if you don't have a gap like this, you can just go ahead and skip through this. This is another helmet that I'm working on, and you can kind of see here that that gap is nowhere near as big as this. What I was able to do with this one is basically everything I just showed you. Is I went through and stapled it, used the PLA glue, welded the seam, and then did the same on the outside. A nice channel here. So if yours looks like this, you can jump to the next segment. However, if you have a gap like this, I don't like just throwing body filler in there. We want to try to make that close that gap off. So what I do is we're going to switch to this little wedge top here. Use some of the same material here to fill this in. Now unfortunately I do not have black. I ran out, but I do have some white. It is PLA plus. Very important if you are filling in gaps with material, make sure you are using the same material. Take this and kind of paint this on as flat as you can. And it does dip down a little bit, but a little bit of a dip is fine for filler. You know, a big gap like that is really really rolling the dice. On this side here, we're going to do the same thing. And you are going to get little dips and little craters and stuff, but like I said, body filler is a great component to use, and we will be utilizing that here momentarily. So that's just an example of if you have a big gap, how to fix it. Like I said, it doesn't look pretty. It's got to look worse before it looks better. If you didn't have to do this, you would completely skip this. If your helmet looks like this, what you would then do, I like taking this wedged tip here and basically just smoothing this out. And the reason I like doing this is when we've gone through and made this seam, it's kind of made like a channel. And there's a little bit of PLA sticking up here and sticking there. By smoothing it out, you're kind of combing that over back into that little channel that we've created with the soldering iron. So Again, it just kind of adds material back into the equation to where it's just going to be a little bit stronger. Just go through and just kind of drag soldering iron over this. And again, be very careful of some of these areas, like right here where there's this curve, but any flat areas, I'm just going to go ahead, smooth all this out, and then we will be ready to begin sanding and filling in all of our imperfections. Now I have gone ahead and smoothed out the areas a little bit. Overall, this helmet is, I mean, it's solid. It's not coming apart, nothing. So now we're going to move out to the work shed and we're going to work on getting all this nice and smooth, show you how to completely eliminate that seam. It's time to clean up on the outside. Inside, if you want to go through and clean it up, I found a little helmet padding, Eva foam. I like to do this by hand. The reason why I don't like to use a big sander is because as that sander kind of goes over, it can round off these edges. It can knock down all of the definition. You've just got some areas that are just very intricate, and a big sander going over it, it might knock that down, but it's going to knock everything else down around it. It's a nice detail sander, and just take some sandpaper and just kind of wrap it over it. So I like to start off with 80 grit. Obviously, we can start a little bit more aggressive, and that's going to knock all these down just a little bit faster. Show you how it starts to level and smooth all this out. In sanding this, we have knocked down some of the high areas, but all of this is lower, and naturally that is going to happen because when we've taken that soldering iron and kind of, you know, dragged it across, some areas are going to dip down a little bit. But it is okay, because a little dip like this is going to be far better than a wide gap. A little bit of what's called prep all, and what this is going to do is just remove any dirt, any debris, any oil that may have occurred while I was sanding that. Just a little dab on the rag and go ahead and clean it. You can also use alcohol if you want. That is perfectly fine. And what we want to do next is we want to go ahead and fill this in. Now, we don't want to use putty. Putty is meant for very, very small imperfections. Even though we fill the majority of this in, it still needs a filler. Filler is going to be way better. It doesn't shrink as much. It's not as prone to breaking down when other top coats are on it. It won't get reactivated by additional primers, things like that. We are going to use probably the strongest, best, and easiest filler that is out there, Bondo plastic metal. This is a pre-mixed, ready-to-use filler. You don't have to worry about messing with hardeners. You don't have to worry about messing with ratios, anything like that. Real quick though, because this does have some pretty nasty solvents in it, is I am going to put my respirator on, as well as some gloves, and show you how this is applied. I like using a plastic spreader because it's going to allow you to evenly apply it on the model. If you use a finger, I guess you could do it. Stuff is a little bit thicker, and it's just a little bit easier to be more precise by using a plastic spreader. I'm going to take my Bondo plastic metal here and just kind of push it around, just because it's been sitting for a couple days, and we want to just kind of mix up all those solvents. I don't really recommend doing it on a separate palette. When I use my U-pull filler, I use it on a palette, and then I'll scrape it and put it on. But the Bondo plastic metal, it does set pretty quick. So usually what I recommend doing is doing like a pea-sized drop, working in small areas and just slowly spreading out. You don't want to put a ton on and try to spread it. It is going to set a little bit quicker. Don't recommend doing it in the sun. If your humidity is high, just take into consideration, it is going to set a little bit quicker. Something around there, maybe a little bit more. Put the cap back on the Bondo plastic metal and just evenly spread it out. And that's really all you have to do. And then I'm going to put my mask on here and just try to get the side. Don't feel like you have to get it all in one shot. We can see there's a little bit of a dip here. You can try to go back over and fill that out. We don't want to make this too rough. So you spread it. If you don't get it in one shot, it's okay. This stuff sits in about 15-20 minutes. Let this sit, sand this down. You can always go back and add more either filler or putty to the equation, depending on how deep your defects are. So we're gonna let this sit, show you how it looks when it's sanded down, if we have to repeat that process or if we can jump to putty, and just kind of show you my whole process on eliminating the seam and filling in these imperfections. So I went ahead and did the rest of the helmet just so I can kind of get like a more uniformed look when we start getting some primer on here and everything. It sets pretty good. We got it applied nice and smooth. Next, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and sand this down. Again, we wanna use a flat edge. We don't wanna use our finger because this can create dips and curves. So we're probably gonna have to go back over this and fill this in with more filler. You can do that now if you want, but what I like to do is sand this back and see where we're at. This is a little bit of a process. Understand when you are doing, you know, whether it's the welding, whether it's the smoothing, you may have to do things, you know, more than once. The last thing you want to do is rush something or put something on improperly and then it mess everything up and you have to do everything over and backtrack. We don't want to do that. So I have my dust mask on here. Always make sure when you are sanding this stuff, it will, you know, particles will fall off. You don't want to breathe those in. 220 is all I'm needing. You can go down to 180. Personally, anything lower than that is a bit overkill. So I'm gonna do some 220, get this all nice and knocked down and see where we're at. Still do have a couple low spots and that is okay. So what we do is we just repeat the process that we did earlier. All right, so again, we're gonna let this sit. I'm gonna sand all this with 220 and see how it looks. Another tip here, when you are done using this, if you're like me and you're working in a shed or any place that gets a little bit warmer, do not leave your plastic metal in there. That will definitely shorten the life of it. Left this in here, and I mean, this is like rock hard. Make sure to store this stuff in a cool place when you are done. Inside, let this sit, we'll sand it and see how it looks. All right, so now that we did our second round of filling with the Bondo plastic metal and have gone through and done a second round of sanding, you can see everything looks pretty good, pretty uniform. There are some very minor dimples and things like that. We don't want to sand too much. These body lines, we want to try to keep the definition. So what I like to do at this point is go ahead and move on to some glazing putty. What this will help do is help fill in any minor pinholes, maybe any deeper sanding gouges or scratches or things like that. I do like to apply this with my finger. It's just a little bit easier. It has a very good play time. It's not as quick as Bondo plastic metal. Again, you do want to make sure that you do have some PPE. This stuff does have some nasty solvents in it. Throw my mask on and get this applied to the mask. We're going to let it sit for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then all we have to do is sand this with 320. Just inspect our work, make sure it looks good. If it does look good, we can move on to primer and see how good of a job we did. Once you've applied the glazing putty and allowed it to set and cure, you can go ahead and sand it with 320 and 400, again, with that nice detail sander, nice flat edge to help keep everything uniform and clean. You can see here it's furthermore smoothing out the helmet, helping eliminating that seam. At that point, you can go ahead and, again, wipe it down with prep ball just to get rid of any dust or debris or anything that's on there, and apply a coat of filler primer. Filler primer is going to help fill in even more minor imperfections and, again, bring out imperfections that may be there that may need additional sanding. You can layer filler primer, so don't be afraid to do this a couple times, and again, sanding it with 320 or 400. I like to apply a black base in between of sandable primer because that will help show the imperfections a little bit better, show where I need to touch up on my sanding. You can see here it's looking pretty good. So again, you may need to do that 2 or 3 times with the filler primer and the sandable to properly identify your defects, but after doing a couple rounds of sanding, you can see here that the filler primer has done its job. It's helping eliminating the seam. It's getting rid of those defects and overall making this look like a uniform single piece. To give you an example of just how good this process works, here is an almost finished piece. This is a Half-Life Combine Soldier helmet. I used the same exact process here. You can see that this was fully welded in the same aspect. I used the stapling process, the PLA gloop, and the soldering iron, but you would never know that there was a seam here, even over that little dimple where the antenna on the helmet goes. Very clean, very uniform. Again, I did have to do a couple rounds of sanding with 320 and 400 using the filler and the sandable primer. But so far on this helmet, the results really speak for themselves. With a little bit of patience and due diligence, this really is a great process. It'll help you get rid of the seam, completely emerge your helmet, and give you great results every time. Now that I've covered all the ins and the outs, let me wrap up this video and give you my final thoughts. All right, guys, well, there you have it. There is my video on plastic welding. It was important for me to kind of revamp this and reclassify it as plastic welding because, as stated, people are using PLA+, PETG, ABS, things like that. I try to touch on a lot more important things, things like proper PPE, just using some essential products that I have used that worked very, very well. Despite my first PLA welding video, that whole process that I did in doing that Vader dome, I mean, that thing came out absolutely awesome. Doing the same process on my combine soldier, you've seen a quick shot of that. I will probably have like a quick short or maybe some kind of update for you guys. The only thing that kind of is, I guess, optional is if, like I said, you don't have that big gap. On my original Iron Punisher here, this one, I did not do that comb over. So if you want to just go ahead and sand this down and then go with the plastic metal, this is a perfectly good seam here. This is basically the same seam that I had on the Vader dome, and that thing came out absolutely awesome. To each their own. Again, this is just kind of a guide to help you guys, and really the combination of the staple gun, the PLA gloop, the welding, and then closing that seam both on the inside and the outside. If you guys use this process, you're going to be left with a fully merged, structurally sound and strong 3D print that you can go ahead and sand, smooth, fill, paint, do whatever you want. Either way, it's going to look absolutely awesome. I want to thank you guys for stopping by and checking out today's video. If you liked it, please go ahead and give me a thumbs up. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or just want to say what's up, please go ahead and drop me a comment in the comment section. I love to hear from you guys. I will reply to any questions or comments in a timely manner. So again, if anything was out of place, didn't make sense, or there was just too much talking and hand movement, drop me a comment, I'll hit you back. Lastly, if you do enjoy all things 3D printing, cosplay, Funko Pops, Marvel, DIY, 3D printing builds, all the stuff I'm doing on the channel, go ahead and click the subscribe button. I have a bunch of new printers, a bunch of new filming and editing and stuff that I'm currently working on. I was fighting a cold for a couple weeks, so I'm finally getting out of that. So the editing is gonna come, the videos are gonna come, so make sure to click the subscribe button, click the notification bell, and come back and see me. That's it for now, guys. As always, I have a bunch of projects I have to go and get to. Until next time, it's DW out. Later.